My fiancé accidentally added me to his bachelor party group chat. Instead of finding jokes or travel plans, I found weeks of messages arranging one last night of freedom with female dancers and the ex-girlfriend he had sworn was completely out of his life. I never confronted him. I quietly saved every screenshot and sent them to the one person who deserved to see them first, his father, the man paying for our entire wedding. My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 28 years old, and until that Tuesday night, I believed I was 3 weeks away from marrying the man I'd spend the rest of my life with. Ethan Cole and I had been together for 4 years and engaged for 8 months. We'd already signed a lease on a new apartment, combined household expenses, and spent countless evenings talking about children, retirement, and where we wanted to build our future. Richard, Ethan's father, insisted on paying for almost the entire wedding. The venue, catering, photographer, florist, band, and transportation came to nearly $45,000. Yet he never made me feel the money came with strings attached. "You two focus on building a marriage," he told us after our engagement. "I'll take care of the wedding." I was covering our Hawaiian honeymoon and several smaller expenses, investing nearly $8,000 of my own. It was more money than I'd ever spent on a vacation, but I believed it was the first chapter of our married life. That illusion ended at 11:07 on a Tuesday night. Ethan had gone to bed early, saying he needed to be well rested for an important presentation the next morning. I stayed in the living room finishing our wedding seating chart when my phone buzzed. "You were added to Ethan's last ride." I barely recognized the number, but weeks of wedding planning had filled my contacts with unfamiliar relatives, vendors, and friends, so I assumed it was another planning group. It wasn't. The chat was already active. Mason, Ethan's best man, had just confirmed a private hotel suite, 4 dancers, and a $500 deposit. Luke joked that Ethan deserved one last night of real fun before Claire puts him on a leash forever, drawing a flood of laughing emojis. Then someone asked the question that made my stomach drop. "Is Olivia still coming?" Ethan said he wanted to say goodbye properly before the wedding. I froze. Olivia Mercer was Ethan's ex. He'd always insisted their relationship was long over and that they barely spoke anymore. Mason answered without hesitation. "She confirmed yesterday. Ethan's been texting her for weeks. Everything's arranged." Before I could process that, Ethan joined the conversation. "You guys are legends. I need this more than you know. One last night to feel alive before I become a boring husband. Olivia knows what I like. I'm not wasting my last chance before life becomes mortgages, responsibilities, and permission slips." 3 weeks earlier, he'd looked across our kitchen table and told me he'd never been more certain about marrying me. Now he was talking about our future as though it were the end of his freedom. I kept scrolling, hoping I'd misunderstood. Instead, the messages became even worse. 2 adjoining hotel rooms had already been booked. Olivia wasn't arriving until after the dancers left, so no one outside the group would see her, and Mason even volunteered to hold Ethan's phone in case I called. When Luke joked, "Just shower before you go home, Claire notices everything," Mason replied, "Late checkout, we'll erase the crime scene." Ethan answered with nothing more than a laughing emoji. That was when I stopped believing they were joking. They weren't planning to cheat. They were planning how to hide it. I sat frozen on the couch while Ethan slept less than 30 feet away. Our seating chart was still spread across the coffee table, his jacket hung beside mine, and everything in the apartment looked exactly as it had an hour earlier. Everything except my future. Without saying a word, I captured every message, every hotel reservation, every reference to Olivia, backed the screenshots up in multiple places, and quietly left the group. Sleep never came. When I finally slipped into bed, Ethan rolled over, wrapped an arm around my waist, and held me the way he had for 4 years. For the first time, it didn't feel comforting. It felt like a stranger pretending to be the man I loved. The next morning, he kissed my forehead. 3 weeks, he said with an easy smile. "Then you're stuck with me." I watched him leave without saying a word. The moment his car disappeared, I called Richard. He answered cheerfully, assuming I was calling about the wedding, but the moment I said, "I was accidentally added to Ethan's bachelor party group chat," his voice changed. "I took screenshots," I told him. "I think you need to see them before Friday." I emailed everything while we were still on the phone. 47 minutes later, he called back. "Where's Ethan?" "At work." "He doesn't know you saw any of this?" "No." Richard was quiet for a long moment before saying, "You did the right thing, Claire." "What am I supposed to do now?" "You've spent 4 years loving my son," he replied. "Now it's my turn to deal with him as his father." Later, Ethan called again. "You had no right to tell my dad." "I had every right. I wasn't actually going to do anything. I didn't raise my voice." "Then why had your friends already arranged the hotel rooms and planned how to hide everything afterward?" "They were being idiots." "And you laughed." "It was just a group chat." "You could have stopped it." Instead of answering, he shifted the blame. "You should have come to me first, so you could delete the messages or warn Olivia." "You're twisting everything." I almost responded, But after 4 years, I knew exactly how this conversation worked. Whenever Ethan ran out of excuses, he stopped defending his choices and started criticizing the way they'd been exposed. "This wasn't one bad joke," I said. "It was a plan." His voice cracked. "Claire, we're only 3 weeks from the wedding. Our families are flying in, the hotels are booked, and we already paid for Hawaii. You were willing to throw all of that away for one night." "That's not what happened." "It is to me." He started crying. "My dad's cancelling everything. He said he'd rather lose the deposits than watch me make a mockery of marriage." I said nothing. A few seconds later, the blame returned. "You wanted this." "No, I wanted your father to know what his money was paying for." "That was our wedding." "It was his money." "You humiliated me." I let the silence settle before answering. "No, Ethan, you humiliated yourself." And he hung up. Less than 10 minutes later, Richard sent a text. "The wedding is cancelled. I've contacted the venue and the major vendors. Don't let Ethan pressure you into changing your mind. I'm sorry." I read it once, slipped off my engagement ring, and stared at the pale mark it had left on my finger. When I got home that evening, Ethan was waiting in the living room. "You took it off." "Yes." He shot to his feet. "Put it back on." "I'm not going to." "Claire, don't make permanent decisions because you're upset." I met his eyes. "I'm not upset anymore." "Then what are you?" I glanced around the apartment. Our engagement photo was still on the shelf, wedding invitations covered the counter, and the suitcase we'd bought for Hawaii sat by the bedroom door. "I'm finally seeing things clearly. I told you nothing happened. You were only stopped before it could. That matters. It tells me you lost the opportunity, not the intention." He rubbed his forehead. "We can fix this." "How?" "Tell my dad he misunderstood. Tell him the group chat was exaggerated. Tell him Olivia was never really coming. She already bought the plane ticket." His eyes dropped for a split second. I didn't need to answer. "I'm staying with Mia." For a moment, he actually looked relieved. "Fine. We both need a few days to cool off." I picked up my overnight bag, but before I reached the bedroom door, he called after me. "Just don't tell anyone else. We can still contain this." I turned around. "Contain what?" "The truth." I looked away. Instead of answering, he muttered, "You're enjoying this." I stared at him in disbelief. My wedding ended today. I found out the man I trusted had been planning a weekend with his ex, and now I'm packing because I can't bear to stay here another night. My voice shook despite my best effort to stay calm. "There's nothing about this to enjoy." For the first time, he looked like he understood what he'd destroyed. Before he could speak, his phone rang. "Mason." Ethan answered immediately and hurried into the kitchen. The only words I heard before the door closed were, "She knows everything." That told me all I needed to know. He wasn't calling to apologize. He was calling to make sure everyone involved told the same story. I packed enough clothes for a week along with my documents, laptop, jewelry, and the few things that actually mattered. Before leaving, I photographed every room and saved copies of our lease and financial records. Ethan watched from the doorway. "You're acting like I'm dangerous." "I'm acting like I finally realized I don't know what you're capable of." I went pale. I walked out without looking back. By Friday morning, Richard had cancelled every major wedding vendor. That afternoon, Mason sent a long message accusing me of spying on a private conversation and destroying Ethan's life over what he called harmless bachelor party talk. Ethan's mother called 6 times that evening. I ignored every one of them. Then my sister forwarded a message from an anonymous account claiming Ethan had been afraid of me for years, that I controlled his money, monitored his friendships, and used Richard to punish him whenever he disagreed with me. The last line read, "You don't know what Claire is really like behind closed doors." They couldn't erase the screenshots, so they tried to erase my credibility instead. By Saturday morning, the rumors had spread far beyond Ethan's family. When I finally turned my phone back on at Mia's apartment, it lit up with missed calls, voicemails, texts, and Instagram requests from people I barely knew. Most of the messages flooding my phone were from Ethan, begging me to answer, promising we could fix everything, insisting I shouldn't throw away 4 years together. The rest came from people I'd never even met, accusing me of overreacting and saying bachelor parties were supposed to be wild, as though secretly planning to spend the night with an ex was somehow normal. I ignored them all until my mom called. Before I could say much, she told me one of Ethan's friends had already reached out, claiming I'd always been controlling, that Ethan wasn't allowed to have female friends, and that I'd spent years checking his phone and manipulating him. I almost laughed. "Did you believe him?" "Claire," she said without missing a beat, "I've known you your entire life. He picked the wrong mother." The weight I'd been carrying eased for the first time in days. I showed Dad the screenshots. "Good," she replied. If this had been one impulsive mistake, people might try to defend him. But secretly texting his ex for weeks, arranging to meet her before the wedding, and asking his friends to help cover it up isn't one bad decision. It's a pattern. After we hung up, my younger sister forwarded screenshots from Ethan's cousin repeating the same story, accusing me of isolating Ethan, constantly suspecting him of cheating and forcing him to hide things from everyone. I stared at the screen, almost impressed by how quickly they were trying to rewrite reality. The same people who had spent weeks organizing lies were suddenly desperate to convince everyone I was the problem. Mia looked over my shoulder and quietly handed me a mug of coffee. "They're panicking," she said. "If Ethan had done nothing wrong, they'd be defending what he did instead of trying to destroy your reputation." That explanation made far more sense than anything they'd been saying. Around 2 that afternoon, the intercom buzzed. Mia checked the security monitor before turning to me. "It's Ethan." For a moment, I considered asking her to send him away, but there was nothing left to avoid. "Let him up." A few minutes later, Ethan stood in front of me looking like he'd aged years overnight. His clothes were wrinkled, his eyes were swollen from lack of sleep, and dried tear stains still marked his face. "I don't even know where to start," he said. "Then stop looking for the right words and tell me the truth." He let out a tired breath. "I never wanted any of this. It was supposed to be one stupid bachelor party." "What about Olivia?" His answer didn't come immediately. "I wasn't planning to sleep with her." "Then why did she buy a plane ticket?" He stared at the floor for so long that the silence became more convincing than any explanation. "I thought I needed closure." I couldn't hide the disbelief in my voice. "If you still needed closure after 4 years together, you never should have asked me to marry you." I was scared. "No," I replied quietly. "You were scared of commitment, but not scared enough to cancel the wedding. Instead, you spent weeks texting your ex, booked hotel rooms, and let your friends figure out how to hide everything from me." He started to object before stopping himself. Whatever excuse he had prepared clearly sounded weak even to him. Several long seconds passed before he admitted the only thing that finally made sense. "I liked knowing I still had another option." That hurt more than every apology he'd offered, because it was the first sentence that didn't try to minimize what he'd done. "So while I was planning our future," I said, "you were making sure someone else still wanted you." I wasn't thinking. "No," I said quietly. "One impulsive mistake happens in a moment. You made the same choice over and over again for weeks." He looked at me with the exhausted expression of someone who had finally run out of excuses. "I'm sorry." "I believe you are," I answered. "I just don't believe you were sorry while you were doing it." Hein took another step toward me. "I love you," he said quietly. I held his gaze without answering. "No," I said at last. "You love what I gave you, my loyalty, my trust, my future, and the certainty that I'd still be here while you chased one last thrill." "That's not fair." "It is. You don't get to redefine love after destroying it." He reached for me, but I stepped back before he could touch me. "I would never hurt you." "You already have." I meant physically. Trust doesn't break because someone hits you. Sometimes it breaks because you finally see who they really are. Before Ethan could respond, Mia finally spoke. She had stayed silent long enough to let him explain himself. "You keep insisting nothing happened, because it didn't." "Fine. Then imagine Claire secretly texting an ex-boyfriend for weeks, booking private hotel rooms, planning to meet him after male strippers left, and joking about showering before coming home. Would you still be standing here saying nothing happened?" His jaw tightened, but no answer came. "That's what I thought." "This isn't your relationship." "No," Mia replied evenly. "But you're standing in my apartment asking my best friend to overlook months of deception. That makes it my business." He turned back to me, desperation replacing frustration. "I'll cancel the party." "It's already cancelled." "I'll block Olivia." "You should have done that years ago." "I'll go to counselling. I'll do anything." I believed him. He probably would do anything now. The problem was that anything had only become an option after he'd lost everything. I can't marry someone I no longer trust. I refuse to spend the rest of my life wondering whether every late meeting, business trip, or phone notification is another lie. I'd never do it again. "You already taught me your promises only matter when you're afraid of being caught." I looked away, searching for an answer that never came. After a long silence, he finally asked the question we'd both been avoiding. "So that's it?" I nodded. "That's it? 4 years gone? You ended them." I made one mistake. I shook my head. "No, you didn't make one mistake. You kept choosing the same lie until someone finally exposed it." Tears rolled down his face. "I don't know how to live without you. You should have asked yourself that before inviting your past into our future." He stood there in silence. Whatever he wanted to say next never came. "So my father just replaces me with you now?" "He won't answer my calls. He cancelled everything and told me I'd embarrassed our family." "I didn't destroy your life. You handed him the match. You built the fire." He opened his mouth as if to argue, then thought better of it. At the door, he looked back one last time. "I hope someday you realize relationships require forgiveness." I met his eyes. "And I hope someday you realize forgiveness comes after honesty, not instead of it." The door slammed hard enough to knock a framed photograph off the wall. Glass shattered across the floor, but neither Mia nor I moved. The silence that followed felt strangely peaceful. Nearly an hour later, my phone buzzed with an email from Ethan. Subject: fair is fair. He demanded $8,000 for wedding expenses, compensation for the embarrassment I'd supposedly caused, and blamed me for ruining his relationship with his father. I read it once, forwarded it to Richard without a comment, and locked my phone. 23 minutes later, his reply arrived. Claire, don't respond. I'll handle my son. Almost immediately, Ethan's mother called. I let it ring twice before answering. Thank you for picking up, Diane said, her voice unusually quiet. I know this isn't a good time. No, it isn't. She accepted that without protest. I've never seen Ethan like this. I've never seen him like the man in those screenshots either. She sighed. He made terrible decisions, but people panic before weddings. There it is. What? The excuse. I'm not excusing him. It sounds exactly like one. He had cold feet. He had an ex flying across the country. I was scared. I was making plans. Those aren't the same thing. After a long pause, she said softly, I don't want two families destroyed over something that never actually happened. It did happen. He didn't sleep with her, only because he never got the chance. The silence stretched between us before I asked the question that had been waiting in my mind since Tuesday. If I'd secretly texted an ex for weeks, invited him to a hotel during my bachelorette weekend, and my friends had helped me hide it, would you be asking Ethan to forgive me? She didn't answer for several seconds. Finally, almost in a whisper, she admitted, I don't know. I do. Ethan would have left, and so would Richard. Another long silence settled between us before Diane finally exhaled. I suppose you're right. It was the first completely honest thing I'd heard from anyone in Ethan's family. I still love him, she admitted. He's my son. I just wish... Her voice faltered. He'd been smarter. The word stayed with me long after the call ended. Not kinder, not more honest, simply smarter. Even now, Diane seemed to see the real tragedy as Ethan getting caught instead of what he'd actually done. I hope he becomes a better man someday, I said quietly. So do I. When I hung up, Mia looked over from the kitchen. How'd it go? Better than I expected. She defended him a little, but I think reality is finally catching up with her. By Monday morning, emotion had given way to logistics. Ethan and I had signed a 12-month lease only 2 months earlier, leaving 9 months still to run. Neither of us could simply walk away, so I drove back to the apartment shortly after 8 while he was at work to collect more of my things before the situation became even messier. Stepping inside felt like walking into a life that had ended overnight. My coffee mug still sat beside his, our grocery list was taped to the refrigerator, and the calendar on the wall still counted down the days until our wedding. 19 days. I stood there for another moment before tearing the countdown page from the calendar. In the bedroom, Ethan's tuxedo still hung beside my wedding dress, both sealed inside their garment bags like they were waiting for a future that no longer existed. I packed everything that mattered, my clothes, family photo albums, jewelry, laptop, financial records, and every document with my name on it. Before leaving, I photographed the apartment from top to bottom, capturing every room and every major item exactly as I found it. Mia noticed. You think he'll damage something? I honestly don't know anymore. She nodded. That's because you don't trust him. I zipped the last suitcase. The truth is, I don't even know who he is. That afternoon, I met my friend Rebecca, a real estate attorney whose judgment I trusted for years. She listened quietly as I walked her through everything, from the accidental group chat to Richard calling off the wedding, then skipped straight to the question that mattered. Any joint bank accounts, credit cards, or retirement funds? I shook my head. None. Good. That saves you a lot of trouble. What about the lease? That's the difficult part. She stirred her coffee before continuing. Legally, you're both responsible until the landlord releases one of you, but that doesn't mean you're trapped. So what are my options? We can ask to terminate the lease early, find replacement tenants, or negotiate directly with the landlord. Since the engagement ended unexpectedly, that documentation may also help. I let out a slow breath. So this is fixable. It is, Rebecca said. It'll cost some money, but that's a lot cheaper than spending the next 9 months tied to someone you can't trust. I couldn't argue with that. That evening, I emailed our landlord and asked to meet as soon as possible. Tuesday morning brought a message from someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Ashley Reynolds, Ethan's cousin. I expected another accusation. Instead, her first message read, Claire, I think you deserve to know what really happened Friday night. After a brief hesitation, I replied, I'm listening. Ashley explained that the bachelor party had gone ahead despite the wedding being cancelled, although many guests stayed away after the screenshots surfaced. Mason insisted Ethan needed a distraction, and because Olivia's flight had already been booked, she came anyway. There wasn't much of a party, Ashley wrote. Everyone knew what had happened. Instead of celebrating, people whispered. Ethan drank heavily, checked his phone every few minutes, and kept stepping outside as if he still believed I'd call. Then Olivia arrived. Ashley admitted the scene was nothing like the rumors. They hugged and talked alone for about half an hour. Then Ethan started crying. That surprised me. According to Ashley, Olivia looked uncomfortable and asked whether he expected the night to restart their relationship. Ethan said no. He only wanted one last night before getting married. That sentence made my stomach turn. It wasn't about closure or reconciliation. It was exactly what I'd suspected from the beginning. He wanted one final thrill before coming back to the life we'd built together. Olivia left before midnight, telling Mason the whole evening had been a disaster, then changed her fight and went home the next morning. Ashley's final message was simple. I'm sorry, Claire. You were always kind to our family. I should have told you sooner. I thanked her and saved every screenshot beside the others. I didn't need more evidence anymore, but every new detail confirmed the same truth. Nothing had been misunderstood. The following afternoon, Rebecca called with the first genuinely hopeful news I'd heard all week. I spoke with the landlord. He's willing to meet tomorrow. What does he need? Documentation, the cancelled wedding, the lease, and proof you aren't living together anymore. If everything checks out, there's a good chance he'll agree to release you from the lease early. For the first time in days, I felt as though there might actually be a way forward. That evening, a message from Richard lit up my phone. I learned something today. I called him immediately. What happened? I was quiet for a moment before answering, and when he finally spoke, he sounded older than he had just a week earlier. I talked to Ethan's younger brother. He admitted this wasn't the first time people had worried about Ethan. My grip tightened around the phone. There was a co-worker a few years ago, nothing anyone could prove, and Ethan always had an explanation. I accepted it because I wanted to believe my son. His voice trailed off before he added almost to himself. I kept calling it trust. Looking back, it was denial. The words hung between us. The screenshots didn't change who Ethan is, Claire, he said at last. They only forced the rest of us to see what we'd been refusing to admit. When the call ended, Mia and I sat together on the balcony, watching the last light disappear behind the skyline. I keep replaying everything, I said quietly. Part of me still wonders if I ignored warning signs. You didn't. She didn't rush to comfort me or offer empty reassurance. Instead, she looked out across the city before saying, people who love honestly don't spend every day investigating the person they're building a future with. You trusted him because that's what healthy relationships require. I let those words settle. The failure wasn't yours, she continued. Ethan convinced himself your trust would always be there, no matter what he did. He never imagined there would come a day when he'd finally run out of it. The next morning, I returned from meeting the landlord to find a large envelope waiting on Mia's kitchen table. The return address belonged to Ethan. I wasn't asking for another chance. I was asking for money. My name was typed neatly across the front, and inside was a formal legal demand prepared by his attorney. Rebecca recognized the law firm's letterhead immediately and let out a quiet sigh. So, he actually hired a lawyer. The first page was titled, Formal Demand for Damages. According to Ethan's attorney, I was responsible for the financial losses caused by the cancelled wedding because I had intentionally interfered with the marriage contract by sharing private messages with Richard. They demanded reimbursement for part of the wedding expenses, Ethan's custom tuxedo, travel costs, emotional distress, and several other alleged losses. The total came to $35,000. I read the letter once, slipped it back into the envelope, and handed it to Rebecca. Take a look. She read every page without interrupting, her expression growing more amused than concerned with each paragraph. Rebecca finished reading the demand letter, then set it on the table with a faint smile. Is that really all they've got? I stared at her. You're not worried? Not even a little. She tapped the first page. Richard paid almost every wedding expense, so Ethan can't recover money he never lost. The tuxedo was his own purchase, and more importantly, you didn't cancel the wedding. You shared evidence that led Richard to make his own decision. I exposed the truth. Exactly. She flipped to the final page. The emotional distress claim is even weaker. Courts generally don't compensate someone for the consequences of their own documented misconduct. The tightness in my chest finally eased. So what happens now? We respond. That's it? Rebecca smiled. That's it? That afternoon, she drafted a formal reply. The tone was calm, professional, and impossible to argue with. It explained that Richard, not Ethan, had paid the wedding deposits, leaving Ethan with no legal basis to recover those costs. It also pointed out that his tuxedo was a personal purchase for a wedding he had jeopardized through his own documented conduct, making that expense his responsibility alone. Rebecca ended the letter with one sentence that made me smile. Should litigation proceed, our client possesses substantial documentary evidence that will become part of the public court record. She closed her laptop and leaned back. I don't think you'll hear from them again. You sound awfully certain. I've been doing this long enough to recognize a bluff. She was right. 3 days later, Ethan's attorney quietly withdrew the demand. There was no apology or explanation, just a brief notice confirming they would not pursue the claim. That Saturday should have been my wedding day. I still woke at 7 out of habit, and for a few disorienting seconds, my mind followed the schedule I'd memorized months earlier. I should have been getting my hair done, meeting the photographer, and slipping into my wedding dress. Instead, I opened my eyes in Mia's guest room and let the silence remind me that none of it was happening. A gentle knock came at the door before my mom peeked inside. "Your father's already cooking." I went downstairs in jeans instead of a wedding gown and found Dad stirring his famous pot roast. "There she is," he said with an easy smile. "You hungry?" "Good, because I accidentally cooked enough for 20 people." I laughed, my first real laugh in weeks. We spent lunch watching an old college football game. No one brought up the wedding or tried to force comforting conversations. They simply let me be their daughter again. And somehow that quiet normalcy healed more than any speech could have. Late that afternoon, Richard called with more good news. "The landlord reached out to me," he said. "He confirmed you're being released from the lease." The relief was almost overwhelming. "The only condition is a 1-month penalty, $1,400. "I know," I said. "Rebecca already showed me the paperwork." "She's very good." After a brief pause, he added, "Ethan isn't taking it well. Since you're being released, he'll be responsible for the remaining 9 months on the lease." I wasn't surprised. "I told Ethan I won't be paying his rent anymore," Richard said quietly. "I've spent too many years rescuing him from the consequences of his own choices. Maybe that's how we ended up here." I understood exactly what he meant. Sometimes parents protect their children for so long that protection slowly becomes permission. A few days later, Ashley reached out again. "Thought you should know something." She attached screenshots of Olivia's social media. One post read, "Never fly across the country for someone who only wants you when it's convenient." Another simply said, "Being someone's backup plan isn't flattering." Ashley added one final message. "She's telling people Ethan used her." The irony wasn't lost on me. After risking everything for Olivia, Ethan had lost her too. A few minutes later, Ashley called. "I figured you'd hear sooner or later." "What happened?" Ethan thought the cancelled wedding meant they finally had a chance. And she let out a dry laugh. Olivia shut him down. She said she only agreed to see him because he kept insisting he needed closure. Ashley paused before adding, "Then Ethan admitted he never planned to leave you." I closed my eyes. "So she flew across the country only to realize she'd been invited to be your last adventure before the wedding." "That's exactly how she saw it," Ashley said. "She left the next morning, and now she's telling everyone Ethan used her." When the call ended, I didn't feel satisfied. What I felt wasn't satisfaction anymore. It was simply emptiness. For weeks, Ethan had gambled our future on a fantasy. When reality finally arrived, no one chose him. Not me, not Olivia, and not even his own father. The fallout only grew worse. Ashley told me Mason blamed Ethan. Ethan blamed Mason. Luke blamed everyone else. And before long, the accidental group chat invitation became the convenient excuse. "If Mason hadn't added your number," Ashley said, "none of this would have happened." I shook my head. "No, if Ethan hadn't planned any of it, there would have been nothing to expose." She laughed softly. Richard said the exact same thing. A few days later, I found a small package from Richard waiting in my mailbox. Inside was a bottle of aged whiskey and a handwritten note. "Claire, for whatever it's worth, I would have been proud to call you my daughter-in-law. You deserved honesty from the beginning, and I'm deeply sorry my son failed to give you that." Richard. I read it twice before putting it back in the box. "You okay?" Mia asked. I smiled through the tears. "I think that's the first apology I've received that wasn't asking me for something." "That's because it's the first real one." Life slowly settled into a new routine. Work became manageable again. I started looking for an apartment, recovered every wedding refund I could, and accepted that while money could always be earned again, trust took much longer to rebuild. Rebecca eventually called with one last update. Ethan's attorney closed the file. No lawsuit, no new demands. I think they finally realized those screenshots would become public if this ever reached court. Looking out the window, I watched traffic flow through the city and realized something. Life hadn't stopped. While I was grieving what I'd lost, it had quietly kept moving forward, and eventually so did I. 2 weeks later, on what should have been our wedding weekend, I signed the lease on a small apartment across town. It wasn't as spacious as the home Ethan and I had shared, but every room felt lighter because everything inside belonged to me. There were no secrets left to discover, no lies waiting to surface. Just the quiet beginning of a different life. A few days after I moved in, my therapist asked a question I hadn't expected. "What do you miss?" I thought for a long time before answering. "Not Ethan. I miss believing I already knew what my future looked like." She nodded. "You're grieving certainty, not the person." The more I thought about it, the more I realized she was right. The final call came from Richard the following Friday. "Ethan moved out," he told me. "Without my help, he couldn't afford the apartment." After a brief pause, he added, "Now I realize those consequences were exactly what he needed." Before hanging up, he thanked me for telling him the truth. "I never wanted to destroy your family," I said. "I know," Richard replied. "My son did that himself. You simply refused to hide it." Then he left me with one sentence I don't think I'll ever forget. Sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is stop rescuing their child from the consequences of their own choices. Life slowly found its rhythm again. Work stopped feeling like an escape and became something I genuinely enjoyed. My weekends were no longer consumed by seating charts and vendor calls, so I started running before sunrise, reconnected with friends I'd neglected for months, and even took a quiet solo trip to the mountains with nothing but hiking boots and a notebook. One evening, while unpacking the last of my moving boxes, I found our engagement album. I sat on the floor and turned to every page. Ethan's smile looked real. Mine was. Every smile in those photographs came from someone who truly believed she was marrying the love of her life. What surprised me most was that I didn't cry. Those memories weren't lies. The woman in those photographs truly loved the man she believed she was going to marry. The tragedy was that he wasn't the person she thought he was. That chapter deserved to be remembered, but it no longer belonged in my present. I closed the album, placed it in a storage box, and finally let it stay there. About a week later, Ashley sent one last message. Thought you'd appreciate the ending. She told me Mason and Ethan were no longer speaking. After 20 years of friendship, each blamed the other for the wedding falling apart, while Luke had quietly walked away from both of them. Olivia had blocked Ethan as well and reportedly told mutual friends she never wanted to hear his name again. The group that had spent weeks protecting the lie had eventually collapsed under the weight of it. Everyone searched for someone else to blame because no one wanted to accept responsibility. I thanked Ashley, archived the conversation, and never opened it again. I didn't need updates anymore. I had my own life to rebuild. Nearly a month later, on a rainy afternoon, a package forwarded from the apartment Ethan and I had once shared arrived at my door. Inside was a small velvet ring box. At first, I frowned. I'd already returned the engagement ring weeks earlier. When I opened it, there was no jewelry inside, only a folded note. I'm Claire. I know you probably won't forgive me, and I'm not asking you to. Therapy finally forced me to admit something I'd been lying to myself about. I kept saying it wasn't really cheating because nothing had happened yet. I repeated that excuse until I believed it. I understand now that I traded someone who loved me completely for a few weeks of attention. I'm sorry. I read the note twice before closing the box. For the first time, I believed every word Ethan had written. The problem was that honesty arriving after everything is over doesn't undo the choices that destroyed it. I placed the box in the hallway closet, not because it deserved a place of honor, and not because I hated it enough to throw it away. It was simply another reminder of a chapter that no longer belonged in my everyday life. That evening, I stood on my balcony watching light slowly appear across the city. I stayed there until the last streak of sunlight disappeared behind the buildings. Below me, headlights drifted through the streets, while apartment windows lit up one by one. I looked at the engagement ring one last time before sliding the box onto the highest shelf of the closet. I switched off the balcony light and walked back inside.